said that Very Vintage TV was growing in more ways than one. So, what's better than one Very Vintage TV presenter?
That's two Very Vintage TV presenters. I'm Tony Daunt.
And my name's Miss Monique Sweet, and you're watching
Very Vintage TV.
Today we're here with Netti Page, and firstly, thank you so much for welcoming us into your big techie oasis.
Thank you.
It's great. So for those of our Very Vintage TV viewers who don't know you or know Netti Page, how do you fit into the New Zealand rockabilly vintage scene?
Well, I've actually been a DJ for quite a long time, and I play 45s, which is obviously very vintage because they're original 45s. And I've also been playing with local bands ever since I came here, really. And so more recently, Tony from Swampland has sort of asked me to become the sort of resident DJ when he organises his gigs, and so that's how I got into playing with them. Well, I think the Northern Soul goes quite well with the rockabilly music, because as a DJ, if you're playing with bands, you don't want to play exactly what's about to come, so it sort of merges very nicely. And so more recently I've been playing with the rockabilly bands, and it's been very well received by the public.
And what New Zealand rockabilly bands have you played with?
Oh, I've played with Tony Daunt's band, Swampland. I've played with the Dick Dynamite and the Doppelgangers recently. I played quite a bit with Libretta, Suede occasionally. And I was actually very fortunate to be invited to play as a warm-up DJ for the Silo Park events last weekend, which works really well too, with actually thousands of people enjoying sort of 50s and 60s style 45s that I played.
Now, you have obviously a large collection of records.
Yes.
When did you first start collecting records?
My first record was given to me when I was 13, and it was the Beatles, so it was this little portable turntable that I had, and then it kind of started from there onwards. And I was very much into rock and roll and rockabilly in the 80s, back in the day. I had the haircut.
Obviously.
Yeah, well, it sort of came, I sort of diverged quite a bit and ended up coming full circle back to it now, but my main passion is obviously also now Northern Soul.
Now, do you yourself own any type of vintage or vintage inspired cars? Or?
Oh, I have a 1971 Holden Kingswood. That's my pride and joy. It's all original. And a 1963 SS180 Vespa. So
Vespa, yay!
Yeah. So
bringing the 60s into it.
So it's sort of like my partner's into rock and roll as well, and he's a bike rider, so we're the traditional modern rockers kind of thing.
Hey Nettie.
Hey.
Let's go talk records.
Okay.
See you later, guys.
Hi Nettie.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks for welcoming us into your house today. And I'm especially interested in the Northern Soul music that you play. Can you tell us a little bit about where that comes from?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that, because I think New Zealand doesn't really know that much about it just yet, and I'm setting out to hopefully change that. So Northern Soul has actually been created by DJs in the north of England who have discovered really awesome raw soul 45s from the US around the period of the sort of mid to late 60s to really through to the 70s, which I believe came there from the soldiers that were still in the UK at the time, and it sort of basically had grown and grown into this big scene in the UK that's overspilled to places like in Australia, for example. There's a huge scene, mostly UK expats, and here there is a small community of people that appreciate it. And the format is 45 RPM records.
And as a DJ, you actually travel to Australia to play in these events, don't you?
Yes, I do. So I go every year. There is a national Australian Northern Soul Weekender. That's once a year, and it moves around between Sydney, Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, Gold Coast, and Brisbane. And so they change around, and I'll follow. This year is in Sydney, and I'm most certainly going to play again records there it's in October.
Now, Northern Soul, was it mainstream music, the soul music?
No, it was never mainstream. It is perhaps a bit more popular now in terms of mainstream people than it was back in the day, but it certainly started off as a sort of very niche thing, and it originated amongst the mod scene in the 60s. So the club that started playing it first was called Twisted Wheel in Manchester, and mods would go there and they would I'm not sure if you know much about mainstream 60s music, but
Yep,
it was very
a little
cheesy.
bit.
And so,
Yeah.
so they would then play these raw, awesome soul 45s from the US. And it's mainly artists who are trying to cash in a bit on the Motown movement, but, you know, their voices were so raw and their recordings were often so garagey that would actually made it sound to me much nicer and much sort of individual rather than, you know, oh well, a clean Motown sound if you wish.
Yeah, so also one of the things I've been led to understand is because it wasn't mainstream music means there wasn't actually a lot of these singles going around because they weren't big sellers,
very
which
rare,
makes them
correct.
incredibly collectible now.
Yeah, so they're very rare. So often there's only 100 made, 50 made, sometimes even just a few copies. The song was discarded as a flop, and then later on someone discovered it. So there's one record, there's only 3 known copies, and it sells for something like £50,000. You can get your hands on it. So and it's a little sad that the artists often didn't get actually the money they deserved, but there is some more contemporary labels now that reissue stuff, and they certainly, depending on who it is, often they make sure that the artists actually get money for the artwork that
That's
they
brilliant.
produce.
So they're getting money now for the things.
Yeah, so there are not every reissue label does that, but
Yeah.
there are labels in the US and elsewhere throughout the world who actually specifically seek out the artist, seek their consent, and pay them for reissuing the records that
That's amazing.
make. Yeah.
Now, where can we go and see this? Where can we go and find you playing?
Well, my DJ name is Netti page, so you can seek me out on Facebook. I promote all the events on Facebook, and there is online sources where you can look things up. There is a big scene in Australia, so they called Northern Soul and Oz on Facebook, and anything that's happening there is promoted there, so people can seek it out or just send me a friend request, and I'll keep people posted.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nettie. Thank you so much. That was Nettie Page telling us about Northern Soul, and that was Very Vintage TV Music News.
And if you want to hear more stories like Nettie's, make sure you subscribe to Very Vintage TV.
And remember, we put out every Wednesday.